In this video, we're going to look at another example of passing by value. And this one, we're going to use two values. So in our main method here, we're going to set up two variables, num1 and num2. We're going to set num1, its value to 1, and num2's value to 2. And we're just going to print them out to verify that that's what those values are. Then we're going to call this method called swap. Okay, and it's going to go down here and run the swap method. And then once that swap method's done, it's going to print out number 1 and number 2 again when it comes back here. So let's look at what swap does. So swap takes the values that are passed in and assigns them to these variables n1 and n2. Okay, so up here we had num1 and num2 in the main method. We're going to use n1 and n2 down here in this swap method. Those values 1 and 2 will get passed into these two variables. It's going to print out a message for us that inside the swap message, inside the swap method, it will print the values of n1 and n2. Okay, then we're going to do a little swap. If we haven't seen a swap before, swap always starts out with setting a temporary variable. So we're going to pass in 1 to this method. So temp will become 1. Then n1 will become equal to n2. So n1 will now hold the value of 2. And then n2 will get the value from temp, and it will become 1. So we're in effect swapping the 1 and the 2 around for n1 and n2. And we're going to print that out again to show that those values have swapped places on these parameter variables, n1 and n2. When it comes back up to here after that method completes, it's going to print out num1 and num2, and we should see that num1 and num2 did not change. So we run it, and here we have, before we invoke the swap method, num1 was 1 and num2 was 2. Once we got inside the swap method, n1 was 1 and n2 was 2. After we swapped them, n1 became 2 and n2 became 1. They swapped places. And then when we went back to the main method, num1 is still 1 and num2 is still 2. And we can run this with debugging so that we can follow this. So I'll start it. I'll set a breakpoint right there. We'll run it with debugging. Okay. And we'll run these first two lines by clicking step over. And we can see that num1 is set to 1 and num2 is set to 2. I'm going to use step over because I don't want to trace print line. And we look at our output. Before invoking the swap method, num1 is 1, num2 is 2. And now we're going to call swap and pass in the arguments num1 and num2, which hold the values. If we hover over it, we can see the value 1 and the value 2. And we'll step into that method call. And if we come down here, we can see n1 is equal to 1 and n2 equals 2. So we'll do the two print statements that show us inside the swap method, n1 is 1 and n2 is 2. We verified that. Now let me run the first line. So temp is now equal to 1. Let's go down here and look at our variables. So temp holds the value 1 now. n1 still holds the value 1 and n2 still holds the value 2. Now we'll change n1 to value 2. And you can see it's bold there. That shows us that that was the last thing that changed down here looking at our variables. And now n2 got set to 1. We can see that down here. So it swapped the values for n1 and n2. Next, we'll print them out. And we can go back to our output window. And we see after swapping, they switch places. We go back to our calling code up here, and it's going to print out what the value of num1 and num2 is. And we can see that they are still their original values. They did not get swapped. We swapped the two variables inside the method, and it did nothing to the variables because we passed them by value or we passed them by copy. It might be another way that you want to think about it. We passed a copy of them. We didn't change the original values.